Good evening, gentlemen. I'm going to have a very short video this time. I'm going to talk about nuclear war. You all know that the first time the nuclear bomb or the atomic bomb was used with the Americans when they used them over Japan, and that was in May 1945. They targeted three cities, but they used only two, that was Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the devastation was so terrible that the Japanese said, hands up. Emperor Hirohito signed on the dotted line, dismissed the war cabinet, and allowed the Americans to land in Tokyo and occupy Japan. That is what happened. It's a very terrible thing, and more than 100,000 people died in Hiroshima, and another 70 to 80,000 in Nagasaki. The world realized the danger of a nuclear war, and once the Soviet Union had come up as a counterpoise to the Americans, a decision was taken to have something called detente. That means live and let live, and to obviate the danger of a nuclear war. It is important we also remember that Europe has been the center of two world wars. The First World War, we had the Central Powers, including the Ottoman Empire, fighting the Allies, that is the British, the Americans, and earlier the Russians. Finally, the Russians made peace with the Germans. And then during the Second World War, we had the Axis powers, that is the so-called Pact of Steel, with Hitler and Mussolini and the Japanese, and they were fighting the Americans, the British, Russians, and the French, the Free French. Now, these two wars are a child's play if you look at what's going to happen now, because it appears the Europeans have not learned their lessons. They do not believe in detente, do not believe in live and let live. And overall, the biggest danger is the American line of thought in which they want to keep the hegemony over Europe and keep it in such a way that they can keep the mighty Russian state at bay. They have created an enemy in Russia. Now, as far as I recollect, right from 92, Yeltsin and party, they were very amenable to the Americans. Even when Donald Trump was in the opposition and leading the campaign uh, against Hillary, the Russians were looking for a resettlement of their ties with America. Putin was doing that. He didn't want a confrontation with America. But America was not prepared to shake hands with the Russians. That is the crux of the issue. They were expanding NATO eastwards, knowing fully well that they were going to antagonize the Russians. All the small countries like the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and all they were incorporated to NATO. I couldn't understand what was the reason behind it. Because NATO, all said and done, is a paper tiger. And much as my American and other friends who may disagree with me, but that is the actual fact. NATO hasn't fought a single war, and the armies are not battle tested. They were relying on something called MAD, mutually shared destruction and nuclear weapons. But that's all over now because nuclear weapons give a country authority, and the Russians have made it very clear they wouldn't mind using them if required. Now, that's the crux of the problem. The Americans wanted to incorporate Ukraine into NATO and surround Russia so that it could become weak, and maybe at some stage they even wanted Russia to break up further. I mean, some more states to break away from Russia so that Russia becomes a skeleton of what it was during the days of the Tsar and the USSR, and the Americans could hold their sway all over Europe for the next 100 years. I won't talk of a 1,000 year reach regime which was thought of by the Nazis, but the Americans certainly were planning for the next 100 years. But then again, Biden in particular, he's pretty old as it is, and I think he's a little senile. He's the one who had suffered a loss of image in Afghanistan when the Americans retreated lock, stock, and barrel, leave everything behind. And many people have called it the mother of all retreats. I don't think it is something to be proud of, or the American army can say, we're very proud of Afghanistan. Really? I think they should be ashamed of what they did there and the way they threw in the towel and left. So Biden was looking for some opportunity to get his name back into history, and he chose Ukraine. Now, that was the wrong decision. You don't do these things just off the cuff because you must realize the consequences. As I've told you earlier, the first two wars, world wars, the epicenter was Europe, and there is a chance that there's going to be another third world war now. It looks very far away, and many are hoping that the Russians will see reason, won't use nuclear weapons or something like that. But are you really going about it thinking that way? It's a very fallacious thinking because the Americans are now giving the latest weaponry to the Ukrainians, and this fight would have ended a long time back, but for the help being given by the Anglo Saxon powers and the EU and NATO. I think, when I was in school, I used to read that Norse myth, where the god Loki says that those whom the gods wish to destroy, they make them mad. That is it. And I wonder whether the Americans have become mad. And the small EU countries like Belgium, Holland, all of them are so small. I mean, in a sense, Romania and the Baltic states, how these countries are just egging on the Americans to fight. Look at Poland. It even wanted to host nuclear weapons. I mean, I couldn't see the logic behind it, and all I can see is a very foolish decision. But the Americans have not yet done it, but they might do it. And now the Americans are expanding the NATO to Finland also and Sweden, and both these countries are going to have to face Russia. Now it's all ready. It's not paper tiger work that you keep on sending weapons. They think it'll be a localized conflict. It'll continue. Russia will collapse, and it's not going to happen like that. You must remember, it only requires a spark uh, to get a big explosion done. And the Russians have the most modern weapons. What happens if the American weaponry helps Ukraine drive the Russians out of Ukraine? Do you think the Russian president or the Russian people are going to accept it? They will use whatever is at their disposal to stop this from happening. And all the tricks which the Americans tried, like taking Russia out of the SWIFT banking system, economic sanctions, everything has become zero. It's a double-edged sword, like the big broadsword. It cuts both ways. And the EU countries are in real problem in winter. That is why the Germans are not sending the Leopard tanks to Ukraine. The French are also wary, but the Americans are sending their latest weaponry there. The British are sending their most advanced tanks. You see, it's very okay. But the question is, what is going to be the consequences and why are you doing it? I think the American and the British think tank, which are thinking and planning this thing out, haven't really catered for the consequences of what will happen. They are egging Russia on for a nuclear war. That is what it appears to me. And the Russians may oblige them, but the Americans who are thinking that they'll have a first strike and probably destroy Russia once for all is not going to happen that way. The Russians would retaliate, and in case they use the weapons first, they would have the advantage. It will be a very sad state of global history if, like the first two world wars, the third world war also has Europe as the epicenter, and it is very likely. I'm afraid, gentlemen, it may look very improbable now. Most of the people are talking and saying that Russia may be defeated or Ukraine will be defeated. This thing will happen, that will happen. America is not giving up. Well, fair enough, they're not giving up. Neither the Russians. So, what is the solution? Solution is only a nuclear exchange or an agreement with Russia. If the Americans were to have an agreement with Russia, they would have done it much earlier. They don't want an agreement. They just want Russia to be finished. So for Russia, it's an existentialist crisis, and that is very, very dangerous. Gentlemen, I'm not an alarmist, but there is a very good chance that this thing will happen, and that could create a real danger for Russia, leading them to use their nuclear strike forces. In that case, the Third World War would again be in Europe, the epicenter. And what is the result? These countries would go back to the Stone Age. Gentlemen, goodbye. God bless. Do subscribe to my channel. Share it with your friends. I say Jai Hind, glory to India. Take care and God bless.